My name is Nora Bennett, and I live in Seattle, United States. The city feels like a rhythm I can never quite predict. Gray skies in the morning, light rain by noon, and the smell of coffee everywhere. I met Michael Grant on one of those damp Mondays when everything felt slower than usual. The elevator doors were closing when he stopped them with his hand and stepped in. He smiled politely, the kind of small, steady smile that made you want to exhale. He worked in operations at the logistics company, where I had just started as an analyst. I was 27, trying to learn everything at once and pretending I wasn't overwhelmed. He was 10 years older, calm in a way that made chaos seem manageable. Around the office, everyone said he was reliable, the one who quietly fixed problems before anyone noticed they existed. He kept his desk clean, his ties simple, and his phone face down during meetings. Our friendship began the way quiet friendships often do, through small gestures, with nothing dramatic. He showed me how to navigate the company's expense system when I messed up a report. He stayed late once to help me finish a client proposal. We talked about music once, both admitting we liked older records more than anything on the radio. He had this way of speaking, slow, thoughtful, and always kind. At company dinners, when everyone else drank wine or beer, he always asked for water with lemon. At first, I thought it was health-related, but the more I got to know him, the more I realized it was deliberate. He avoided alcohol completely, without explanation. He didn't flinch when others teased him, just smiled and said, "I like to remember my nights." There was something quietly sad in his tone, but I didn't press him. Some stories, I thought, reveal themselves in their own time. We started dating after a few months of lunches that weren't quite dates, but also weren't just friendly. He invited me to a small bookstore cafe on Capitol Hill one Saturday. We spent hours talking about nothing and everything: books, music, the city, work frustrations, even dreams about owning a home. That night, as he walked me to my car, it began to drizzle. He opened his umbrella halfway over me, leaving his shoulder exposed to the rain. That small act, protective but unshowy, was the moment I knew I could love him. A year later, I bought my first home, a small gray Craftsman in Ballard. It cost $645,000, and I'd saved for nearly 6 years to afford it. It wasn't big, just 2 bedrooms and a crooked pear tree in a yard, but it felt like a life milestone. Michael helped me move in. We painted the walls ourselves, soft white for the living room, pale blue for the kitchen. I remember us sitting on a step stool, eating takeout, because the furniture hadn't arrived yet. We slept on a mattress on the floor for 3 nights and laughed about how adulthood sometimes felt like camping indoors. Every Sunday, we made dinner together. I cooked. He chopped vegetables. He liked to keep the kitchen neat, wiping down the counters as he went. We'd listen to old records from the shop on Fremont Avenue: Fleetwood Mac, Simon and Garfunkel, Norah Jones. The rain on the windows, the sound of a pan sizzling, and his quiet humming, it all became our rhythm. He rarely spoke about his family. When I asked once, he said, "It's complicated." I didn't push further, assuming maybe they lived far away, or that there was a falling out he didn't want to revisit. He seemed content with our small circle of friends, his work, and the house. I thought love didn't need explanations as long as it felt right. When my parents came to visit from Ohio, they adored him at first. My mom, Patricia, saw his manners and calmness as rare virtues. My dad, a practical man, liked that Michael had a steady job and paid his bills on time. But after a few months, my mother began to ask when we'd set a wedding date. "You've been together long enough," she said, flipping through her notebook filled with venue ideas and budgets. She suggested a ceremony near Pike Place Market and offered to contribute $8,000 toward expenses. She already had color palettes and flower options written out. When I mentioned it to Michael, he just smiled and said softly, "Let's keep it simple. Maybe a courthouse." I thought he was just being modest. But when my parents visited again and brought it up at dinner, his expression changed. He said, "My family probably won't come." The air went still. My mother blinked, unsure what to say. My father reached for his coffee and muttered something about understanding family differences. I changed the subject to paint colors. That night, as we washed dishes side by side, I asked gently, "You don't want to invite them?" He dried his hands, looked at the floor, and said, "It's better that way." His voice carried a finality that stopped me from asking more. From then on, our life settled into a quiet pattern. He woke early to go to the gym before work, brought home flowers every Friday, and fixed small things around the house without mentioning them. I'd find a loose cabinet hinge suddenly tightened or a dripping faucet repaired. On weekends, we took long drives around Lake Union or stopped at farmers markets for fresh bread. Still, the distance between what I knew and what I didn't begin to grow. Every time I thought about our wedding, a faint unease crept in. Why didn't he want to share that part of his life with me? Why did he avoid any mention of his past? He never lied, but he never opened up either. One evening, after dinner, I saw him sitting on the porch staring into the rain. His hands were clasped, eyes distant. When I asked what he was thinking about, he just said, "Some things are better left quiet." I didn't argue, but a part of me wondered if silence could really hold forever. The house felt warm, the lights soft, the rooms peaceful, but in that peace, something unspoken lived. I told myself it was love that didn't need words. Yet, deep down, I sensed that someday, his silence would lead me to a truth I wasn't ready to hear. Michael left for a short work trip to Spokane one Thursday morning in late spring. The house felt quieter than usual, the kind of silence that hums when you realize you're the only one breathing in it. He'd forgotten his navy jacket on the chair by the front door and left a neat pile of unopened mail on the entry table. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just a hardware coupon for the paint rollers we needed for the guest room. But while flipping through the envelopes, one caught my eye. It was a postcard, the kind you'd buy from a dollar rack in a gas station. A cartoon sunrise stretched over the words, "Greetings from Tacoma." My first thought was that it was junk mail until I saw the neat handwriting. Lily Grant. The name stirred something I couldn't place. I turned the card over. The message was short. "Hope you're doing okay. Still at the same place if you ever want to talk. Love, L." He had never once mentioned a Lily. I put the postcard back where I found it and stared out the window. The rain streaked down the glass in long, uneven trails. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I trusted him. But all night, the name echoed in my head like a faint melody I couldn't turn off. By morning, curiosity had turned into a quiet ache. I made coffee, filled my thermos, and drove south on I-5, telling myself it was just to ease my mind. The address was in Tacoma, on South Meridian. The neighborhood looked worn, the kind of place where time moved more slowly than in the city. Paint peeled off fences, mailboxes leaned crooked, and a bike without a front wheel rested against a chain-link fence. When I reached the number from the postcard, I hesitated. Maybe I was making a mistake. But something told me this was where the truth lived. I knocked. A young woman answered, maybe 19, her brown hair tied messily in a bun. She wore a faded sweatshirt and held a chipped mug between her hands. Her eyes caught me off guard. They were Michael's eyes. Same gray-blue color, same depth. "Hi," I said carefully. "I'm Nora. I think you know Michael Grant." She blinked, startled, then opened the door wider. "You'd better come in." The apartment was small but tidy. A thin blanket covered the couch. A tiny fern sat on the windowsill, and a small space heater buzzed near her feet. The air smelled faintly of detergent. She gestured for me to sit. "I'm Lily," she said after a pause. "You're his girlfriend?" "Yes," I said. "We live together in Seattle." She nodded slowly, looking at her mug as if it held an answer. "He's a good man," she said softly. "Haven't seen him in a long time." Her words came hesitantly, as if each one had to pass through a storm before it reached her lips. I didn't want to pry, but once she started, the story began to unfold like an old photograph, edges worn and fragile. Their childhood had been marked by chaos. Their mother had struggled with alcohol and then with pills. Their stepfather had a temper that came and went with the liquor bottle. The only steady presence in that house, Lily said, had been their older brother, Aaron. He kept food in the fridge when their mother forgot, walked her to school, and made Michael promise to leave the day he turned 18. But things fell apart fast. One night, a fight broke out over money. Their stepfather was drunk, their mother was yelling, and Aaron was trying to protect them. A bottle shattered on the floor. The police came, but no one was arrested. A week later, Aaron packed a duffel bag and left. He promised to call. He never made it past the county line. His car crashed on a rain-slick road just after midnight. He was 21. Michael, Lily told me, had been the one who identified the body. He stopped drinking that week and never touched alcohol again. He quit his job at a warehouse, took night classes, and found work that didn't remind him of home. For years, he sent Lily small amounts of money, $60, sometimes $100, with notes that said, "Pay the bill," or "Buy groceries." She said he visited twice after he moved to Seattle, but each visit ended with fights. He loved her but couldn't stay connected to the past that had nearly broken him. I sat in silence, the chipped mug warm between my hands. My chest felt tight, heavy with the weight of what she'd shared. Everything about him, the careful speech, the neatness, the way he avoided drinking suddenly made sense. His quiet wasn't attachment, it was survival. "He thinks he doesn't deserve anything good," Lily said softly. "Not after Aaron. Not after the things that happened." I told her about the house in Ballard, the way he brought tulips every Friday, how he'd been patient and kind, how my parents wanted a big wedding and he didn't. Her eyes softened with something close to relief. "He doesn't hate weddings," she said. "He hates being seen. When people look at him too long, he remembers everything he lost." I looked around her apartment. Small, worn, but clean. There was dignity in the way she lived, even in the simplicity. She didn't ask me for anything, didn't cry or speak badly of him. She just looked tired, as though she'd been waiting for someone to care enough to ask. Before leaving, I pulled out a business card from my wallet and wrote my address and phone number on the back. "If you ever need a ride to Seattle," I said, "or just dinner and a warm place for the night, call me." She hesitated, then nodded. "He deserves someone who listens," she said. The drive back up I-5 took almost 2 hours. The rain came in sheets, and traffic crawled past the industrial outskirts of Tacoma. I kept thinking about the picture of their lives, how the silence I'd mistaken for secrecy was really grief. How love, real love, sometimes meant standing quietly beside the ruins someone carries inside them. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the porch light had flicked on automatically. The house glowed softly against the gray evening. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain on the roof, feeling something shift inside me. The fear I'd felt was gone, replaced by understanding. What I'd found that day wasn't betrayal, it was the truth he'd been trying to protect me from. I stepped inside, breathing in the familiar scent of home, and knew that my love for Michael had changed. It wasn't the easy kind built on mystery and charm anymore. It was heavier, more human. The kind that stays even when the stories get hard to hear. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was already on, throwing a warm glow across the damp steps. Michael was in the kitchen, unpacking groceries I'd ordered that afternoon. He looked up, smiled, and said, "You're home early." His voice was calm, as always, but I felt my heart thudding harder than it should. I took off my coat and stood there for a moment, watching him. He was slicing lemons with quiet focus, like the world had no sharp edges. I realized I couldn't keep what I'd learned inside me any longer. The truth needed to live out loud now, not rot in my chest. "Can we sit down for a minute?" I asked. He glanced up, concerned, but nodded. We sat on the sofa, the one we'd found at a second-hand shop in Ballard for $280. I took his hands in mine and told him everything. The postcard, the trip to Tacoma, the building on South Meridian, the girl with his eyes. I told him about the chipped mug, the small apartment, and Lily's soft voice when she spoke of him. I didn't rush. I didn't accuse. I just told the story as it was. When I finished, the room went still. He stared at the floor, his hands motionless in mine. For a long moment, I thought I'd broken something sacred. Then he pressed his palms together, bent his head forward, and cried, quietly, deeply, like someone releasing years of locked breath. "I wanted to tell you," he said finally. I just didn't know where to begin. Everything back then felt like a story no one should have to hear. He looked up, his eyes wet but steady. I'm not proud of how long I stayed away. But I couldn't bring her into what my life had become. I thought distance would protect her. I thought silence would keep the past from spreading. I moved closer, resting my head against his shoulder. You don't need to protect me from your past, I whispered. You just need to let me walk beside you in it. He exhaled, a sound half sigh, half release. When Aaron died, he said, I promised myself I'd never be like the men I grew up around. I'd never lose control again. So I stopped drinking. I stopped trusting. I stopped letting people close enough to see how broken it was. Then you let me in, I said. He nodded. And I didn't know how to tell you that the good parts of me exist because of all the bad that came before. I held his face between my hands. You don't need to explain anymore. We can start from here. The idea formed almost before I could stop it. Let's get married, I said. Not next year, not in some hall my mother rents out. Just us, the people who matter and no one else. He hesitated. You mean the courthouse? Yes, I said. Simple, honest, real. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Only if Lily comes. I smiled through my tears. That's what I was hoping you'd say. We chose a date 3 weeks later, a Friday morning when the city would still be quiet. The ceremony fee was $87. I ordered a white knee-length dress online for $220 and found a pair of soft blue flats for $46. Michael had his navy jacket cleaned and bought a new tie, deep gray, $30 from a downtown shop. My mother tried to take over the planning as soon as she heard. You can't just run off to a courthouse, she said. At least have flowers, Nora. A cake. Photos. I promised we'd have a backyard lunch later and told her to save her energy for that. She sighed and mailed me a $1,000 check anyway. I used it to start a small savings account for Lily, in both my and Michael's names. Each month after, we added $150. The morning of the wedding, Seattle was gray and drizzly, which somehow felt perfect. Lily took the early bus from Tacoma. I met her at the station with coffee and a hug. She wore a simple gray dress and a thrifted cream cardigan. She held a single white tulip in her hand. When Michael saw her walk into the courthouse lobby, his breath caught. He hugged her so tightly that I thought he might never let go. My parents arrived a few minutes later. My father shook Michael's hand firmly. Welcome to the family, son, he said. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue before we even stepped inside. The ceremony itself was simple. No aisle, no music, just a magistrate with a gentle voice and a smile. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto my finger. When it was my turn, I looked into his eyes and said, "We build from truth now." He nodded, his jaw tight with emotion. When the magistrate said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," my mother let out a joyful sob that made everyone laugh. We took a few photos outside the courthouse, the city behind us veiled in drizzle. Lily stood between us, smiling shyly, holding the tulip like it was a treasure. My father snapped the pictures on his old phone, muttering about how his hands weren't steady. I didn't care. It was perfect. Afterward, the 5 of us walked to a small cafe near Pioneer Square. We ordered sandwiches, soup, and coffee. The total came to $86. I've never had a better meal in my life. There were no speeches, no champagne toasts, just quiet laughter and easy conversation. Before Lily left for Tacoma, we told her our plan. We wanted her to stay with us on weekends while we began the guardianship process. For a moment, she looked startled. Then her eyes filled with something that looked like hope. "You'd really want me there?" she asked softly. Michael reached for her hand. "You're my sister," he said. "You belong with us." The following week, we met with a family lawyer in downtown Seattle. The consultation cost $3,200, and we signed the papers that same day. The process would take a few months, but it didn't matter. The decision was already made. When we left the lawyer's office, the rain had stopped, and the streets glistened like polished glass. Michael turned to me on the sidewalk and said, "This feels right. Finally." I smiled and took his hand. "It is right," I said. "We're not running from the past anymore. We're building something out of it." He looked up at the cloudy sky, then back at me, his voice soft but certain. "This is the first time I've ever felt like I have a real home." And standing there, between the courthouse and the gray Seattle streets, I realized that home wasn't the house we owned. It was the life we were choosing together. When Lily came to live with us that July, the house felt fuller in a quiet, unexpected way. I had spent the week preparing the spare bedroom, the one that used to hold storage boxes and extra paint cans. We cleared it out together, Michael and I, setting up a small desk by the window and a twin bed with soft gray sheets. We bought a used dresser for $120 from a couple in Fremont and found a simple white lamp for $18 at a thrift store. When Lily arrived with 2 suitcases and a folded blanket, she smiled shyly and said, "It feels like a real room." I watched her unpack. She lined up her books neatly on the windowsill and taped a worn photo of Aaron, the brother she'd lost, to the wall above the desk. Michael stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. He stared at that photo for a long time, then reached out and straightened it slightly before stepping back. "He'd like this," he said softly. That was all. The first weekend passed quietly. Lily helped me make breakfast while Michael fixed a leaky faucet. We took her to a small diner on Market Street for pancakes and hot chocolate. She laughed at the syrup running down the plate, and I realized I hadn't heard her laugh before, not really. On Sunday morning, Michael asked if we could visit Greenwood Memorial Park. The drive was silent except for the sound of rain tapping on the windshield. The cemetery was quiet and green, the sky a soft gray blanket like most Seattle days. The stone with Aaron's name was simple, just a name, 2 dates, and a single carved tulip. Michael knelt, placed 2 real tulips on the grass, and whispered, "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." I knelt beside him, my hand resting on his back. "You kept Lily safe," I said. "You saved yourself, too." "That's love, Michael. That's enough." We stayed there for a long time. When we walked back to the car, the tension that had always lingered around his shoulders seemed lighter, like some invisible weight had finally shifted. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. It wasn't a movie with background music and perfect mornings. It was real, messy, and ordinary in all the best ways. Mornings started with oatmeal and coffee, Lily yawning at the kitchen counter, and Michael scribbling numbers in a small budget notebook. He helped her build a spreadsheet to track expenses, color-coded in greens and blues. I set aside $300 each month for her books and bus fare when she enrolled in community college for the fall. One afternoon, she showed me her schedule. "English composition, intro to psychology and statistics," she said proudly. I hugged her, remembering the girl I'd met in that small Tacoma apartment, surviving on courage alone. Now she was planning her future, and we were part of it. I opened a small college fund in her name and deposited $2,500 to start. My parents sent a card with $200 inside and a handwritten note that said, "We're proud of you, sweetheart. Welcome to the family." Lily sent them a text filled with heart emojis. My mother cried when she read it. "She reminds me of you when you were younger," she said on the phone. In August, we appeared in court for a guardianship hearing. It wasn't dramatic, just a short session in a modest room with pale blue walls. The judge asked a few questions about our home, our income, and our plans for Lily's future. We answered calmly, side by side, in clean clothes that smelled faintly of rain. When the judge signed the provisional order, Michael exhaled as though he'd been holding that breath for years. Outside the courthouse, he squeezed my hand and said, "I never thought I'd have this, a steady home that feels safe." I looked at him and smiled. It's safe because we built it together. From then on, our weekends became rituals. Saturday mornings were for grocery runs and cleaning. Sunday evenings were for cooking dinner together with the windows fogged from steam. Lily played music on her phone, dancing badly on purpose just to make us laugh. The kitchen smelled like garlic and bread and safety. Michael started sleeping better. He didn't wake in the middle of the night anymore. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on the porch early in the morning, drinking coffee and staring at the pear tree in the yard. You ever think about how quiet peace can be? He asked one morning. I nodded, understanding completely. When my mother called to ask about a bigger celebration, a real wedding reception, as she put it, I told her maybe we'd host a small picnic when the sun came back next spring. We don't need centerpieces to feel married, I said. She laughed and agreed to wait. By September, Lily had started college and was thriving. She came home with stories about professors who cared and classmates who made her laugh. On her first payday from a part-time job at a cafe near campus, she brought home a small potted plant for our kitchen window.
For good energy, she said.
It was a little crooked, but perfect in its imperfection. Every month, we drove back to Greenwood Memorial to visit Aaron's grave. Michael didn't cry every time anymore. Instead, he told stories, small ones that made us smile. Like how Aaron once fixed a flat tire with nothing but patience and a pocket knife, or how he could make their mother laugh even on her worst days. Those stories turned grief into memory, and memory into something lighter. On the way home, we'd stop by a small cafe overlooking the water. Michael always ordered water with lemon, and I'd get coffee. He no longer apologized for his choice. He didn't need to. One evening in late October, after Lily had gone to bed, we sat together on the porch wrapped in a blanket. The city lights flickered in the distance, and the air carried that cool edge of approaching winter. You know, Michael said, I used to think love meant fixing everything. Now I think it's just showing up every day, even when it's hard. I leaned against him and whispered, that's all I ever wanted. Sometimes I wake before dawn and listen to the house breathe, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the rain against the windows, the creak of the floorboards. It's not a grand life, but it's real. A clean sink, a worn jacket on a chair. A girl is reading by the window. A man who chooses not to drink and chooses us instead. When I look at our small gray house with its bright blue door and the pear trees swaying outside, I feel something I never used to, peace that doesn't depend on perfection. We didn't build a fairy tale. We built something sturdier. A home stitched together with honesty, care, and a quiet kind of courage.